when Dada Saheb Phalke made Raja Harishchandra, if you compare and contrast it with the Hindu revivalism launched by Lokmanya Tilak, you would feel that it's a kind of veiled political manifesto.
You are observing the whole movie industry, Indian and international movie industry, from approximately late 50s, 1950s. So within like 10 years of Indian independence.
You can say safely from 1960, 60 years of journey,
right,
with international and national cinema. There's a simple answer. People always start with that. It learned directly to copy from Hollywood cinema right from the 1920s. But I had a small difference, which in my opinion is a major difference. In fact, cinema was first shown in India on 7th July 1896, only 6 months after its first screening in Paris. Liberalization gave us a very new concept. The credit card became more important than our national passport. And you find these newly liberated women like, say, Kahna Pyar Hai, 1999. What do you find? Amisha Patel has immense buying capabilities and she could pose like anything. Will you consider her a liberated woman? She only opened the door of foreign purchase. With Ritik, it became a kind of journey, which is evident in Garcia Marquez's novel. There is not much difference in Subarnarekha and 100 Years of Solitude. Both wanted to discover the hidden truths of our history, which is unwritten.
इतने आदमी थे।
राज, अगर ये तुझे प्यार करती है तो ये पलट के देखेगी।
कौन कमबख्त है जो बर्दाश्त करने के लिए पीता है? मैं तो पीता हूं कि बस सांस ले सकूं। दूर गांव में जब बच्चा रात को रोता तो माँ कहती है, बेटे सो जा नहीं तो गब्बर सिंह आ जाएगा।
रिश्ते में तो हम तुम्हारे बाप होते हैं, नाम है शहंशाह।
थप्पड़ से डर नहीं लगता साहब, प्यार से लगता है।
खामोश है, जिंदगी और मौत ऊपर वाले के हाथ है। जहां पना उसे ना तो आप बदल सकते हैं ना मैं। हम सब तो रंगमंच की कठपुतलियां हैं जिनकी डोर ऊपर वाले की उंगलियों में बंधी है। कब कौन कैसे उठेगा ये कोई नहीं बता सकता है।
जब तक सलीमा है लोग चूतिया बनते रहेंगे।
Welcome to Chondimondop. This is Sriloy. In an era of post-truth, propaganda, metaverse, and a decreed world of unwisdom, teachers are our lighthouse of freedom to think. Professor Sanjoy Mukhopadhyay is one of those rare teachers to have irreversibly shaped the minds of generations of students, taught them how to think. I would even dare to say that we have a living legend among us. Today's torchbearer of an mythical teacher since time immemorial. He is immensely popular among the cinema literati in Kolkata. His lectures are jam-packed, provoking, heart-pumping extravagances. He is an eminent professor of film studies at Jadavpur University. He was also the director and CEO of the Rupkala Kendra by Government of West Bengal from 2005 to 2008. He is mainly known for his writings on cultural modernity in India. He is also noted Ritik Ghatak scholar, author, translator, as well as a commentator of social issues. Today he talks about how the socio-economic history of India has set the course and the pattern of film production since the beginning. Although we say films are the reflection of life, he talks about how it has been a two-way street. Sadly, most of his talks, writings, and work is in Bengali. Here is a small attempt from us to let the all Indian audience have a little flavor of this film buff you have never heard of. 1 hour or so is not enough time to complete any serious topic like this. We could not cover every topic or every genre or era of Bollywood, but I think it's enough to provoke our thoughts. Oh, hey, wait. If you like our provocation to think kind of approach to infotainment, please subscribe to Chondimondop. Ciao. Which year did you start going to the theaters?
Though I was very little, a kid rather, I accompanied the seniors, some of my seniors and elders in my family, to the theatre houses in Kolkata, in North Calcutta. I saw Utpal Datta's On Guard and Fairy Fauj.
Which year was that, Sanjoy?
It was, in fact, during 1956, 57.
57, as early as that.
I was a very little kid. I remember nothing of On Guard, excepting the fact I attended the show. But I can still very well remember Ferrari Fauj and Collo. And the cinema journey also began in the late 50s and early 60s for a curious reason, not because of cinema. Those days, our feudal lineage was heavy. And my mother forced my sisters to take this little kid as a watchdog. Now, you see? And that was the beginning with my journey of Uttam Shutit.
Oh,
I
nice.
came to know these persons and these famous melodramas, Uttam Shutit melodrama. I attended Mughal Azam, Dilip Kumar's epoch-making melodrama. And I started my journey with world cinema right from 1967-68.
67-68.
Not only Hollywood cinema, but international cinema. You see, say Michelangelo's three films, Passenger, Zabriskie Point, and Blow Up. These were three MGM films. Though it came from Michelangelo Antonioni, we attended real shows in Metro and Jyoti during those days in Kolkata. It was possible. Kolkata was much civilized then, I would argue. These days, you only see Hindi popular films and Hollywood films. La Dolce Vita from Fellini was commercially released in Kolkata in 1958. And people like Satyajit Ray, Mrinal Sen attended these shows.
What are the influences of Indian society to Bollywood movies and vice versa? That's the story that we are trying to fetch today.
The question is very interesting, that how to begin the tale of Indian cinema. There is a simple answer. People always start with that. It learned directly to copy from Hollywood cinema right from the 1920s. But I had a small difference, which in my opinion is a major difference. Indian cinema is not proper cinema the way Europeans or Americans understand. Our cinematicity is a bit different. Let me explain why. In our case, it is an extended form of a kind of rural folklore. We were more used to oral tradition of listening to the Ramayana and Mahabharata, our two great epics.
They were called Ram Leela, right?
Ram Leela. There were small village gatherings. And cinema came like that.
And the Parsi theaters? Do you think the Parsi theaters influenced?
The Parsi theater. That is why I was saying that it was more of a metropolitan folklore. In Kolkata too, that was not Parsi theater, that was definitely a kind of Bangla theater of Girish Ghosh tradition, which influenced the early cinemas of Hiralal Sen and Jamshedji from Jimadan in the eastern part. And in the western part, it was definitely the Parsi theater. In fact, cinema was shown in India on 7th July 1896, only 6 months after its first screening in Paris. On 28th December, the Christmas Eve, 1895 in Paris. And then after 6 months, Lumiere brothers was traveling and the ship reached Bombay port and they arranged a show mainly for the British officials and for the rich men, because the ticket was priced at ₹1, that quite high for those days. And people attended the show, the same thing. Workers coming out of the factory, etc., train reaching metro,
the railway station,
etc. But very soon, Indians decided to make cinema on their own, because in the beginning, They were moved by the spectacle. Satish Chandra Bhadbhadekar in Bombay and Hiralal Sen in Kolkata, and there are other persons also, mainly photographers in Tamil Nadu and other places. They began their journey. What was it? It was mainly depiction of events, say sunset on the Ganges, or some staged play. In fact, what Hiralal Sen did, Alibaba is a play written by Kirot Prasad Vidyabini, and he straight arranged a camera, a frontal viewing. There was no change of camera position, no editing, direct recording. That was Kirot Prasad Vidyabini's Alibaba in Kolkata. Almost the same thing was taking place everywhere in India. How society influenced. Yes,
And vice
definitely. Our first feature film that way in 1930, when Dada Saheb Phalke made Raja Harishchandra, if you compare and contrast it with the Hindu revivalism launched by Lokmanya Tilak, you would feel that it's a kind of veiled political manifesto. In fact, Raja Harishchandra was a kind of foregrounding of the Indian values, the Indian feudal values as opposed to Western modernist intervention in our culture. That was a kind of protectionism. It is a kind of reminder to the society that in the real state we were richer, we were much generous from inside our soul. And these mythical tales attracted the audience. In fact, in the beginning, from say 1908 or 9 to 1920, the reign of these Hindu mythical tales. In Bangla, you see, 1917 saw the release of Harishchandra made by the Madans. And next year, Billo Mongol, the film has been restored, fortunately. Billo Mongol, again a kind of religious state, in 1921. It's a very important year for Indian history. One, this is the year when Sukumar Rai gave birth to his son, Satyajit Ray.
Yeah.
And then, in the political front, we saw the launching of Gandhiji's first non-cooperation movement with the Britishers, Gandhi's first rise to power. A gentleman called Dhiren Ganguly, he was trained in Shantiniketan, Brahmacharya. Till then, it was not Vishwabharati, and there was no Kala Bhavan practically. He made a film called Bilet Ferot, England Return. It actually ridiculed and laughed at the intellectuals who were opening umbrellas in Kolkata when it rains in London. It was, in my opinion, the first direct social intervention, a kind of critiquing the society, began in 1921. Then Pashupati Bhattacharya, he made Man Bhanjan, a story of Rabindranath Tagore, which incidentally briefed about the arrival of theatrical spectacle in cinema. Giribala, the housewife, learned how to enter the Star Theatre and how to be moved with the spectacle that was going around. This was the first kind of cinematic experience, I would say.
The Bengal Renaissance, as we know today, which was basically the highlight of Asia's education, influenced by Western system of education, that Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay was writing novels, which was pretty much influenced by the British or the European style. And he was saying that, okay, well, we need new formats in our literature. Madhusudan Datta was doing that. Everybody, Tagore, he traveled all over the world.
Yeah.
He got his music, he got everything. So the basic pattern of that time was that we will absorb everything from all over the world. At the same time, when we were making movies, we were still sticking to our old stories from our mythologies and stuff. There is a disconnect. I mean,
I have some differences with your observation. Now, a kind of enlightenment mainly confined to the upper middle class elite section of societies, mainly the Hindu Brahmins and Kayasthas, the upper caste people. It did not reach this women, neither the subalterns. No Dalits are downtrodden in the caste-dominated society who get the benefits of British Now, because of this limited domain of enlightenment, you feel cinema, being a mass art, when it came to encounter the public in general, you can't expect that in literature it happened because of literacy, and literacy was available for the elites. The non-elite did not touch it. Even in its peak period, the Bangadarshan was sold only 1800 copies that days. But in cinema, you can't afford to do that. You should open your door for the commoners also. And who are the commoners? The people who just reached Kolkata, since Calcutta was the capital of British India, and they wanted to have fun because they lost their kirtans, like Jumur, like other things. In Calcutta, they had some theaters, but theaters were costly. So they opted for the amazing experiences of cinematic spectacle. That was the role of religion, but religion was gradually giving ground to society, I would say. You look at the film very carefully, if you can. Chandidas, 1932, India's first blockbuster film. It basically deals with the 15th century Vaishnavite poet Chandidas, a kind of saint who wrote some lyrical poems. It has a love story with a Brahmin poet and a Dalit woman called Rami Dhopani. The love story of a Brahmin elite with a washer woman, why did it get popularity? Because you see, from 1932, Gandhiji and the Indian National Congress began to preach their now famous lessons on the Harijans. Because after attending the second roundtable conference in London, Gandhiji got assured that unless Congress reaches the Dalits, the British will play the divisive card. DC, depressed community, Muslims, and caste Hindus. They will be divided into 3 blocks and they will discuss and nothing will emerge. So Gandhiji played his political card and he embraced the Dalits and invented the neologism of Harijan, a person near to Hari, Lord Vishnu. And since this kind of tale was publicized by Devaki Bosu, a Congress veteran who incidentally came to the world of cinema, it became immensely popular. It became immensely popular. And there you find that even within the religious framework of a story, you find elements of social consciousness. Say 1936, Achut Kanna, the untouchable lady, made by Himanshu Rai and Devika Rani. The same story you would find. Apparently, a love story on rural scenario, but it speaks of politics, direct politics. And that is why, gradually, with the coming of Udayar Pathe and other films, Udayar Pathe on the Road to Sunshine in 1944, you find the picture of Karl Marx even in a Terminian leadership. And then came the independence. You can welcome it, you can condemn it, a divided kind of independence.
I don't think there is any document in popular media that made me understand the journey of Indian cinema this way. So let me conclude in 2 lines. One, because the Hindus, so-called Hindus, were in power in India, they were the majority and they had the power. So they were making movies on their own religion. It's not religion, it's mythology, but in India it's blurred. Where the mythology ends, where religion starts, it's blurred. So it was based on mythological tales. Later on, Indian freedom movements at its heyday, like, congressmen who were actively involved in politics, they came into movies. And that is why gradually those stories became the story of common man. So we see how the journey from the traditional Indian theaters, common man carrying those traits like songs and then dances and then love stories, those were carried over, but it became a political statement. More of a
that way
statement.
Indian cinema was not pure cinema. It was a kind of mixture of popular folk tales, music, local dance, costumes, and others. A grandiose of Indian life that way. And when IPTA joined the fray, Indian People's Theatrical Association, influenced by Communist Party, it also began to play its own card, the rural card. Say Nabanna was staged in 1944 and it was filmed in 1947, Dharti Ke Lal, by K. Abbas in Bombay. And it had immense popularity because it first projected landless labor in a city environment, his helplessness and his utter cry for human rights. This was the journey.
So people could connect one to one.
People could connect with cinema.
And it was making commercial success or no? These movies?
Yes, it was making commercial success. Even I would say that in a feudal setup, you seldom find conjugal love, not to speak of romantic love. Cinema made it possible. So cinema became an obscure object of desire with the city audience also. And that is why cinema was possible. What was not possible in real life became possible on the screen. So people rushed to look at it.
And I also heard, Sanjoy, is that there were like pornographic movies abundant in Bombay film industry those days, which led to the government worried.
In India in the beginning, there was no censor system. So you were permitted to have long French kisses showing off thighs and body part, etc., etc. In 1918, the Britishers understood it is not only a question of sexual exposure, it also contains some political intonations. That is why the cinematographic committee was formed, and from 1921, censor came into being. Censor was not that concerned with exposure of female body. It got itself involved with the political intonations. That is why in 1921, a film was made, Bhakto Bidur, and it was immediately banned. But the Bhakto Bidur in that film appeared like Gandhi. And the Britishers immediately understood that these messages are really from M.K. Gandhi, not from this mythical figure. So they banned the film. But you know, the censorship, in 1930s, you find a film, Karma, from Devika Rani and Himanshu. You have a 4-minute kiss there. Just imagine.
Just kissing, nothing else, like nothing else goes on.
Nothing else, nothing else. A frontal kissing.
No flowers moving here and there.
Yeah. In fact, the films we were referring to the kind of Hunterwali or other things where the Indian ladies were shown in hot pants and other dresses, but that was limited. That was not a prime affair with the audience.
So you are saying that it was important because of sedition, political reasons, and of course there were like some patriarchy. Well, a lot of intellectuals from this communist movement regime, including all these people from IPTA, and they joined the theatre movement.
In 1943, April, IPTA got its birth in Bombay, and in Bombay you find people like Kaifi Azmi, Sardar Jafri, Raj Kapoor. They were joining the fray. And in Bengal, a lot of people like Shambhu Mitra, Bijan Bhattacharya, Khaled Chaudhary, etc., and their followers like Shalil Chaudhary, Ritik Ghatak and others, they joined the fray. And naturally, they began to influence Bangla society with their anti-fascist slogans in the beginning, and then down with the freedom struggle in the second phase from 1948. And that definitely influenced cinema. Look at Chinna Mool, 1950, the first partition film made by Nimai Ghosh, a Communist Party activist. There you would find direct societal portrayal. It's like a kind of newsreel documentary. In fact, where Nimai Ghosh showed the refugee slums and other things, they are palpable, real documentation with the partition problem available today for the historians. You won't believe it that in our archive, there is not much footage of what happened really during partition. So far as pictorials are concerned, we'll have to depend on Nimai Ghosh and his film Chinna Mool. In English, it means The Rootless, made in 1950. And in Kalpana, a Hindi film made from Kolkata, Uday Shankar, the great dancer, he experimented with a dance form of cinema In fact, Rabindranath Tagore, in one of his writings on cinema, he was one of the most important early theoreticians of cinema, so far as Indian perspective is concerned, first spoke of a cinema which would go beyond the narrative and would become like a Beethoven symphony, which does not contain words, or dance performance which avoids words. He was against literary narrative. This is a kind of thing which must be given due importance, because in Kolkata, particularly in Bangla culture, films became books from 1930s, because it began to have a cultural practice to directly adapt fictions into celluloid screens, a kind of adaptation. People expected that stories written in words would be explained in cinema using sound and pictures. That was it, a kind of translation.
It was like a today's version of soap opera. It will be a nice story, people will laugh, people will cry, and then that's right. It. So it's
that beyond the studios or right on the streets, people were invited to participate. It is because of the IPTF movement in 1940s that even outsiders, so-called outsiders, who are not studio people, there was huge studios like Hollywood, MGM or Warner Brothers or UK studios, like say Bombay Talkies in Bombay. In Pune you find Prabhat Studio. In Kolkata you find New Theatre Studio. In Madras you find Gemini Studio. Beyond the studios, commoners were also invited, and their talents were used. It is mainly because of the IPTF. We are moving forward. Then came a group of people who began to seriously think of cinema in another way. You may call them art cinema people, you may call them literary activists, but they decided that cinema should invent its own way, the way the French in the 1920s thought that cinema could convey human emotions and human intellect in a different kind of way, and Impressionist cinema and later Surrealist cinema were invented in 1947 itself. After India's partition and independence, Satyajit Ray, along with his now famous friends and colleagues like Bongshi Chandragupta, Subroto Mitra, Ritik Ghato, Kamal Kumar Majumdar, Radha Prasad Gupta, established a society called Calcutta Film Society, in which he declared, I quote Satyajit, that in the year of India's independence, we formed the first film society in Kolkata, thereby shackling ourselves willingly to the task of disseminating film culture even amongst intelligentsia. Underlying the use of the word film culture. That means they felt a kind of absence of film culture. What was film culture then? In fact, that film, like literature or drama, can convey human expressions, was understood by a few people in Bombay and in Kolkata. They were led by Calcutta Film Society and led by Satyajit Ray, but this was possible because of two important visits. Firstly, Prof, the famous Russian filmmaker, visited Kolkata in 1949. He met mother and other things. The Communist Party activists and the IPTF people could meet him, and he specifically explained the other cinema that way, the cinema beyond Hollywood, the glory of Russian silent cinema. And then came Joe Renoir, son of Auguste Renoir. And Renoir, particularly to Satyajit Ray, Bongshi Chandragupta, Subroto Mitra, explained that it was not actors, it was not the narrative. The most important thing in cinema is the use of light. Light in the dawn is different from light in the dusk, though both are basically low light photography. And there were some theories, because film studies did not gain prominence those days. But what the basic evolution of Pather Pachali? In Pather Pachali, you see, Bengali cinema, and that way Indian cinema, got a very important reversal of track. What kind of reversal? In 1931, sound came to India and cinema became a kind of vehicle which was so worthy, because in India the oral tradition is very powerful and actors always spoke things. They always gave huge speeches, long dialogues, very serious messages, and they thought that India would be reformed by listening to these messages. Pukar, like Raj Kapoor, or say Udayar Pathe, they are mainly important for dialogues. What Satyajit Ray did in Pather Pacheri, you would be astonished to know that usually people feel shy of referring to that. You would feel it's a half-silent movie. Half-silent I play. He practically stripped film of dialogue. Indian cinema were heavily loaded with words, and he practically edited words out. His cinema was a journey with the pictorials. A film is made to narrate with images, not ideas. And Satyajit made it possible that how to narrate it with images. You feel the beginning of Opera, The Unvanquished in 1956. You find a kind of celebration of pictorial images. Words are relatively absent, not to speak of thought. Songs. In fact, in 1948, Satyajit wrote a brilliant essay, his first film essay. In 1948, he wrote, "What is wrong with Indian film?" There he argued that we definitely lack a kind of typical iconography of cinema, which is Indian. He was actually pleading the cause of Indian national cinema. This was the moment of birth of national cinema. Before, in his opinion, India has cinemas, but those cinemas mainly resemble Hollywood cinema, American cinema. Those are no national connections in costumes, in dresses and designs. And you find unnecessary use of music. Movement has been misunderstood and therefore it has been equated with action and action with melodrama. And he specifically said, music will not hold water in our case because Western music depends on orchestration. It has a serious notation. You cannot say that in London, Beethoven Fifth Symphony different from Vienna. No, everywhere, even in Kolkata, it has a strict notation that you can imagine Rag Iman Kallan being played by Ali Akbar Khan in a manner, say in Nandan or Birla Sabhagriha in Kolkata, very much different from what he played in Albert Hall. Indian music is largely improvisation. It has less drama and more abstraction. I'm referring to Satyajit Ray. I'm not a music expert. But that way, the central point is that Indian cinema was learning how to use pictorials. It is not that Satyajit Ray is the only answer. You find the case of Ritik Ghato, quite different from Satyajit Ray. You find the excessive use of music. You just refer to Meghadagatha. It's a film based on the Rag Hamsadhani. The beginning, the closure, and the climax all depends on the movement of a classical raga. In direct contrast to what Satyajit Ray preached, you find this bit. And along with it, in the 50s, you find the birth of superstars in Indian cinema, birth of stardom that way. To name a few, in Bombay you find Dilip Kumar, Raj Kapoor and Devanand. In Bengal you find Uttam Kumar, and in Tamil Nadu you find Shivaji Ganeshan. Why? Because after the partition, there was a huge turmoil in our social life. Transfer from village to urban area. Sudden implementation of industrialization programs and sudden implementation of democratic procedures like election and other things. We are not accustomed to that. We did not expect that we would have our rights to put our signature on the ballot paper. We were not accustomed to have these chimneys in the landscapes. Still, factories, iron and foundry factories began to grew up in Durgapur, in Villa, in Rourkela, India suddenly entered into a kind of industrialization. India suddenly began this journey in a post-colonial path.
So that led to a lot of workers also, and then we see all this workers movement and
lot of workers, peasants were turned into workers, mass immigration, and change of location. So this social absurdity got its maximum point, and this is the moment of melodramatic imagination. All these films, you consider this is, I would say, take it as a basic point. The year we saw the release of Pather Pachali also saw the release of Shap Mochon, the Uttam Suchitra melodrama. And almost similarly, the way Apurva Kumar Rai from village landed in Kolkata in 1956 in Aparajito, it was the same way Uttam Kumar came from village and landed in Kolkata in 1955. Almost the same. The story is basically involves a kind of change of location from rural to the urban, and the kind of internal travel, the emotional upheaval thereof.
You are suggesting that post-independence industrialization, number one, and number two, the lack of the crisis of British rule. So we were independent and we couldn't handle that. We didn't know how to handle that. These two led to a new generation of art form, which was a little bit urbanized.
It was more the release of a metropolitan mind in love affair, say romantic affair. It was not possible in rural environment to have access to kind of conjugal relationship. But that was made possible in 1950s in Kolkata streets. Look at the Uttam Suchitra melodrama like 74 and a half, Shade Chuatto, Shapmochin and other things. And look at Satyajit Ray sensibility. It's straight anti-feudal and a kind of regard to the value system which was much worshipped during 19th century. A kind of secular, scientific attitude that was brought forward by Satyajit Ray in the films. And Hrithik too, in a different kind of way, he, like Michel Foucault, questioned the authenticity of progress and enlightenment in Indian society. He thought going back to the roots would be possible. With Hrithik, it became a kind of journey which is evident in Garcia Marquez's novel. There is not much difference in Subarnarekha and 100 Years of Solitude. Both wanted to discover the hidden truths of our history, which is unwritten. In fact, the new youth, comprising our elders, they began to break the chain. They first informed us that there's an academic domain which deals with formal literature, theater proper, and other things. But there are deviations, and these deviations exist in the cinema auditoriums. These deviations exist in the popular forms of music. Hemanta Mukherjee, Kishore Kumar, and other people. This Uttam Suchitra melodrama and this Hindi film, say Mughal Azam in 1961, first partially color film of India. You see, Pyar Kiya To Darna Kiya, the first utterance of love, open utterance of love, on screen, moved us like anything. When Madhubala addressed Dilip Kumar, Pyar Kiya To Darna Kiya, the whole of India agreed with it. We have a right to love. Why should we get afraid? In fact, the popular cinema translate people's aspirations.
You guys were the first generation who were born in independent India and was educated in the independence. So growing as India grew up. So at that point, your previous generation, they were then drawing a line for you. This is everybody is applauding to this Pyar Kiya To Darna Kiya and Uttam Suchitra, like innumerable number of. But then they were teaching you, they were showing you, okay, well, there is a difference, and here's what you see in Hollywood, here's what you see in Russian movies.
And then came the moment of neoliberalism. After India's independence, the government of India, Nehruvian socialism, in tune with Russian socialism, decided to launch film as an official platform of the government of India. First film festival in independent India was held in year 1952. 4 cities were taken into consideration: Delhi, Mumbai, then Bombay, Kolkata, and Madras. And by we mean common people, not only Satyajit Ray, Ritik Ghatak and others, the film activists. We first got access to films like Ladridi Bicycle Thieves, Rome Città Aperta, Rome Open City, La Terra Trema, The Earth Trembles, these films from Italian neorealism, along with Frank Capra or John Ford films. We came to know that even film has different genres, different movement, different approaches. So life was brought to cinema. You find a group of new filmmakers. Not only Satyajit Ray became the most important and internationally famous.
The poster boy, yeah.
But you find a lot of people like Minal Sen, like Rajen Tarakdar, like even in popular film, Agrogami and Agrodut, Vibhuti Laha and other people, Rajen Tarakdar, you find Tapon Sinha, lot of people, Parthapratim Chaudhary, they were preaching and practicing films in a way which was different from Hollywood's spectacle. It has its Indian touch. এই পথ যদি না শেষ হয় তবে কেমন হতো তুমি বলো তো? This kind of thing became quite exciting for us and we accepted that.
এই পথ যদি না শেষ হয় তবে কেমন হতো তুমি বলো তো? এই পথ যদি না শেষ হয় তবে কেমন হতো তুমি বলো তো? যদি পৃথিবীটা স্বপ্নের দেশ হয় তবে কেমন হতো তুমি বলো তো? তুমি বলো।
Kahe mujhe kahe jangli kahe. When Shammi Kapoor said it in 1964, we thought that we have a right to cross the limits of civilization because that goes against the established notion, civil norms.
So that was the empowerment of the common man.
चाहे कोई मुझे जंगली कहे, कहने दो जी कहता रहे, हम प्यार के तूफानों में गिरे हैं, हम क्या करें?
And one more important thing that you said, the vision for India that our forefathers had, the founding fathers had, fortunately it was a bunch of educated people from all over the world, and they saw a reason to find collaborations for films from all over the world that are coming, and then we only enriched ourselves, and a parallel movie movement was born, which did not have much of a connection with the common men who were not that educated. They were enjoying Uttam Suitra cinema, and you guys were enjoying too, but you had a parallel way.
In fact, Nehru, first Prime Minister, had a kind of socialist notion in his administration. And he thought that since we lack literacy and since film requires no training to appreciate or depreciate, you can spread your political messages through film. That is why the government gave wide support to film industry. And the film, Phir Bhi Dil Hai Hindustani, this kind of nationalist notions were propagated even in commercial cinema. And film became a vehicle of spreading social messages. The way Lenin supported the cause of cinema, even in Soviet Union. You'll be astonished to know that Lenin, despite being strongly anti-American, he was a person to force Soviet filmmakers to see intolerance made by D.W. Griffith in America. Because Lenin could understand that intolerance, though a bourgeois film, for the Soviet filmmakers is better to follow the path of montage initiated by Griffith. And the story went everywhere, in East Europe, in India, in the new liberated countries of Africa, South America, everywhere. The socialist regimes and the newfound independence thought that film would be a kind of password for development.
Wow. That's quite a statement. I have, of course, not watched all the movies that you have watched, but the movies that I have watched, there was a notion of, in those days, in the movies of 50s and 60s, there was a notion of empowerment of common people, showing them what the oppressions are from people of different class, and then you can do it if you like, that you can achieve anything.
अलग कैसे? देखो, यूनियन जो कहता है करना पड़ता है, और हमारी मांगे कोई ज्यादा है क्या? क्या मांग रहे हैं हम? बंगला मांग रहे हैं? कोई लाख रुपए मांग रहे हैं? कोई मोटर गाड़ी तो नहीं मांग रहे हैं हम सिर्फ इज्जत से जीना मांग रहे हैं बस।
क्या स्ट्राइक करके इज्जत मिलेगा?
ये स्ट्राइक वाइक तो होता रहेगा मामा, अपने को चाय मिलेगा कि नहीं?
हाँ मिलेगा, लाती हूँ। ये टिफिन भरने दो, काम पर देरी हो जाएगी।
देखो, मेरी बात को समझने की कोशिश करो। हर चीज का भाव ऊपर जा रहा है, उस हिसाब से पगार नहीं बढ़ना चाहिए क्या? अच्छा पगार, साल का बोनस, ये मांगे पूरी नहीं हो सकती?
हाँ हो सकता है, लेकिन ये काम यूनियन का है, उसको मांगने दो। तुम काय को बीच में पड़ता है? अगर मिल को ताला लग गया तो? काय
को ताला लगेगा भाई? हमने कोई धमकी दी है क्या? और ऊपर से सिर्फ हम
ये हमेशा का रोना है। तुम्हारा मांग कभी पूरा होने वाला नहीं। फिर काम बंद, मिल बंद। हम बोलता है तुमको, ये यूनियन कुछ नहीं करने वाला।
Look at Indian history and society. The beginning of the 70s, in fact in 1970 I was a second year student in Jadapur University in the Department of Electrical Engineering. A period which can be defined as a period when instabilities became the rule. You find the arrival of Amitabh Bachchan defines a specific moment, a very important moment for the Indian masses. He is the first hero, the first star. In the non-conventional sense of the term, he was not quote-unquote good-looking, directly showed you chest hair. That way, he was offbeat. He was offbeat. And in his languages, you find no sweet romantic charm. And you find quite often some slangs. ये देश की तरह बात का है।
हम भी वो हैं जो कभी किसी के पीछे नहीं खड़े होते, जहाँ खड़े हो जाते हैं लाइन वहीं से शुरू होती है।
तुम लोग मुझे ढूंढ रहे हो और मैं तुम्हारा यहाँ इंतजार कर रहा हूँ।
Till Rajesh Khanna, you saw some romantic, good-looking heroes were ruling the screen. Take up the heroes: Dilip Kumar, Raj Kapoor, Devanand, Shami Kapoor, all of them, Rajesh Khanna, all of them were quote-unquote good-looking, soft-spoken, and lovers, again quote-unquote. But here is a person who is right from the street and is like a street urchin. Look at this film Sholay, which was released on 15th August 1975. What was Sholay? A huge blockbuster hit. That is yet another story, a kind of Western made in the Indian idiom. But basically, it silently propagated this message that when order is injustice, disorder is the beginning of justice. And to defy is to remain committed to patriotism. You find two lawbreakers, Amitabh Bachchan and Dharmendra, Biru and Joy. And they were challenging the whole lot of dacoits in Chamba. I am not referring to those good landscapes and other John Ford-like games. But what I am saying, that it is the first film which defied many norms. First glorified a homosexual inside a prison. Before that, we did not explicitly understood the presence of a gay person in cinema. Secondly, in Hindi cinema, this is the first film which allowed a widow, a Hindu widow, to express her inner feelings to a stranger. A kind of silent love between Jaya in the role of Amitabh Bachchan played the role, and Jaya Bachchan played the role of the widow, Sanjoy Kumar's son's wife. And then you find the uneven fight. Ultimately, Joy and Bidu won, the common. And you find again the deployment of mythical things like Shubhadra, Haron and other things when Hemalini was driving a chariot. carrying Joy and Biru. And those love story, actually, it first allowed Indian mass to go beyond the law, because the emergency, the experience of emergency made them feel that all these legislative assemblies and the court of law are fruitless. They remain at the service of the establishment. So you have a right to be liberated. You have a right to go beyond the margin. You have a right to become like Biru and Joy, to behave like Amitabh Bachchan, and that is why Amitabh Bachchan became a national hero.
I have two questions, Sanjoy, at this point, right at this point. Number one, do you think by that point, people started questioning the Victorian morality or the colonial style, colonial rules? You have to dress certain way, you have to talk certain way to be counted as, gentlemen. Those kind of things.
I agree.
Yeah, those things are really going on.
This is the first non-formal journey in the popular level.
Exactly. And then number two is that the way you are saying that, women were becoming more powerful in the movies, like in popular. Does Indira Gandhi has a role to play in that? I mean, I always feel that Indira Gandhi, despite of her political journey, I mean, you may agree, disagree, but Indira Gandhi gave a lot of power to Indian women.
Definitely. After 50 years of her existence, now we understand that. But in the thick of the battle, we couldn't follow her policies of nationalization and empowerment of women and other things. That was the last great torchbearer of Indian socialism. After that, everything got a change. Everything was transformed, and in 1991, you found our new liberalization policy, of which you yourself is a product.
Blockbusters, films like Diwar, Janzir, and Namak Halal, is it the direct reflection of industrialization of India?
This dialogue, "Mere paas maa hai," though it was not uttered by Amitabh Bachchan, it was said by Shashi Kapoor. It was actually a kind of rebuke to the emerging capitalist values that no, I have no car,
I see.
But I have my mother.
I see.
That's
very interesting.
That's very interesting, and this line got immense popularity. It became almost a national slogan. "Mere paas maa hai."
People could relate. I mean, the emerging.
I have no automobile. I cannot travel through any airplanes. But mere paas maa hai.
आज मेरे पास बिल्डिंगें हैं, प्रॉपर्टी है, बैंक बैलेंस है, बंगला है, गाड़ी है, क्या है तुम्हारे पास? मेरे पास माँ है.
They were practicing aesthetic rhetoric, but that did not mean much to the Indian audience. Instead of that, the voice of the popular became much more important.
Nice.
Mere paas maa hai.
Nice. But you see the conflict in that same dialogue. One of the most famous dialogues in Indian movie. It has a political statement. It is basically a socio-economic statement. We can understand the socio-economics of that time.
Statements are very important for modernity. When Bengali novel began its journey in Durgesh Nandini, published in 1865, you find a tremendously loaded statement. Who is this prisoner? এই বন্দি তোমার কে হয়? এই বন্দি আমার প্রাণেশ্বর. The first voice of the emancipated woman in Indian art. The same way, mere paas maa hai represents a kind of integrity, dignity, and a sense of values in Indian masses.
And also money doesn't mean anything, because common people didn't have money. To empower them, it was important. Did the women characters, I mean, I know Mother India, of course it will come into our mind.
Yes, Nehru Khan's Mother India, or take any film from the 80s. Even the women-centric films are made to order in accordance with the provisions of male desire. It is actually a kind of male design to locate women in a different perspective.
I see.
We have no that way women-centric film, because there is a fundamental social revolution. How would you locate the women in the steering?
I mean, yes.
You can have a prime minister, you can have a Supreme Court judge, but that does not mean that you have the same power like the men.
All-time favorite movie of mine is Chashme Badur, that was made in 1980s. So I don't know, I love that movie. I don't know why. I just love the simplicity, the innocence, and then the way it kind of made a satire of typical Bollywood movie, but yet it made it
To find the landscapes, the character performances.
exactly. It was making it was laughing on Bollywood, yet it made another Bollywood movie, which was a brilliant nuance in my opinion.
आग यहाँ लगी है और कयामत वो देखो। बच्चों वाली हरकतों में तुम मुझे मत घसीटो। लड़कियों का पीछा करना बच्चों वाली नहीं, नौजवानों वाली हरकत है। ओहो शिकार।
चमको, बार-बार, लगातार।
That's how a woman sees the men in that time who were like in their college going age and something like that. So it was a perfect example of, in my my vocabulary of Indian movie, how film from women's perspective can be. Previously, what always like women's emotions are also made by men. What Jaya Bhaduri is doing in Sholay is written by Salim Javed.
You are saying that for Chasne Bahadur is a film truly written by a woman, written, performed, and implemented by a woman. But go in between the lines of the movie, ultimately you will find that yes, they have a strong filmmaker has a strong desire to grab the steering from the man, and she used the eyes of the woman. But then look at his eyes. These eyes were centered around a concept of to be looked atness. Men necessarily doesn't require to be look nice and gentle because they represent power. Their presence is enough. You look at Shah Rukh Khan, look at Amitabh Bachchan, look at Dilip Kumar. For the women, they require a kind of beautification project because they will have to appreciate it. And this time, in Chasne Bahadur 2, I would say that it's a very tricky moment. Women were so designed as to give you an idea of a new woman emerging. But this new woman too served the toolbox of the male folk. The liberation was yet to be achieved.
I see. Yeah, that is also very evident in that movie.
That needs social revolution. It can't be helped. But you see, in the 90s, when liberalization came into being, we found film like Dil Chahta Hai, Kahna Pyar Hai. And we found newly liberated women like Madhuri Dixit, Amisha Patel, and other people. And their freedom. What was the freedom? The freedom to buy and purchase, the freedom to move. Before that, Indian women could move from Ambala to Tamil Nadu or from Ahmedabad to Kolkata. And now we have free access to Switzerland, to Norway, and to a village. That money could flow and the socialist structure was loosened. You have easy access to companies like Amazon and other things. You can buy things from other places. In fact, liberalization gave us a very new concept. The credit card became more important than our national passport. And you find these newly liberated women like, say, Kahna Pyar Hai, 1999. What do you find? Amisha Patel has immense buying capabilities and she could pose like anything. Will you consider her a liberated woman? She only opened the door of foreign purchase. She had foreign perfumes, she had foreign glasses, hairstyles as designed and dictated by Vogue, the fashion magazine.
So economic freedom was kind of brainwashed into the real freedom. We see in Karan Johar movies and everything, like it was not education, it was not what their thinking was liberated. It was the economic liberalization that they talk about.
There's two things. One, a position was attained when we could give up our much established feudal morals. A situation when an individual could dare to individuate himself or herself.
Hello boys. तुम सबको points 10 पे दिया जाएगा. मेरे साथ prom जाने के लिए तुम सबको 3 departments में brilliant होना चाहिए. And that is good looks, and good looks. So, who wants to go to the prom with me?
Your words, Sanjoy, I'm having so many revelations. Is one thing is that then at what point Indian movie got detached from the root, got depoliticized, rather than your own story. Zanjeer is your own story. People are kind of connecting to that man. Women are liking that man. People who are dressing up like Amitabh Bachchan. There was no difference between a man on the screen and a man in, like, you know, in your neighborhood, or a girl in your neighborhood. There was no difference. At what point and why you think, Sanjoy, it got detached and became voyeuristic? Somebody is going to Switzerland, dancing in the fancy beaches. It's not us. It was like a kind of a voyeur that we are looking at it and enjoying it, and people are doing that. So when did cinema become all of that, and why?
There are some clear reasons. Firstly, the collapse of the Soviet system in 1991 also indicated the collapse of a kind of replica which we had in India. Jawaharlal Nehru, Indira Gandhi, Rajiv Gandhi, etc. It ended. We are getting prepared for a liberated India. In fact, the early socialist notions were giving way to the path of new liberalization. And ultimately, in 1991, the then finance minister tabled the motion of this liberation document. After that, you find, instead of collectivity, individual positions becoming foregrounded. It's a kind of false consciousness that independently, as an independent human being, as a person, you are more important than society. If you have money, you can do everything. That was the entire journey. And now look at these films like, say, Amir Khan's
Lagan.
You see the difference. In the Raj Kapoor movies, you find Jis Desme Ganga Bahati Hai. In the Manoj Kumar movies, or even in the Bombay popular movies, you find the notion of nationalism gaining ground. You found your national heroes in Netaji Subhash Bose, in Bhagat Singh, in Mahatma Gandhi and other things. You have the notion called patriotism and nationalism. Now what do you see in Lagan? Lagan is metaphorically speaking about the Indian national movement. Now how casually it speaks that till now we have sacrificed a lot of bloods, we have Andamans, we have cellular jails, we have Jallianwala Bagh and other things. We'll have to enter into a kind of agreement with Britain. Gone are the days which will remind you of enmity, of mistrust and other things. Now, in the whole political struggle is like a game. It will end, and if you win, you win. Nobody will object. You see, a false promise was given by Indian films. Even in Hollywood films, you find people in Paris restaurant singing Chamma Chamma. We think that Indians are gaining ground, even in Europe. We are on the level playing ground.
I will add two more points, Sanjoy, from just from what I understood from your words. Number one, I read a article long time back, I think in New York Times. It says a memory of war. So memory of war is so important. Post-independence in 70s, it was all revolutions everywhere because still the memory of war was fresh. People couldn't accept any injustice. So, and everybody was repercutating to it. But I think what happened later is that got faded. Those people who saw the war, those people who saw the crisis, they all were dead. And filmmakers defined what the characters of the films will be. In the 80s, late 80s, 90s, people who are making films are born in one independent India and coming from affluent societies like Suraj Barjatia, like Karan Johar. They were raised in really affluent societies who had no clue how the rest of the world, rest of India works.
It was a
Unlike-
coup d'etat launched by the new rich section of Indian society.
And suddenly these rich people became good people. Like previously, you just see like how we see the glass, where we place the camera. The people were coming from the movements, IPTA movements, and then from communist movement backgrounds, and congressmen who were working with Harijans and then common people. The movies were made like that. Now the movies are made from those people, and they are like, making, oh, well, yeah, Dil Chahta is like, rich kids can have fun and it can be
As
shown
an axiomatic truth, we now assume that India is rich, India is powerful, and India can dictate. Then you start your narrative.
खलबली है खलबली खलबली है खलबली खलबली है खलबली है खलबली खलबली है खलबली खलबली है खलबली खलबली है खलबली है खलबली.
This is a false premise, and now we are trying to understand this, and that is why the Congress party lost ground, BJP came into power, and they preached a whole different ideology of nationalist ideals and nationalist dreams, a kind of alternatives. Right from the days of IPTA, you reach the other extreme. You are trying to reconstruct the Indian narrative in a different way. Everywhere. It all depends on the political outcome in the coming years. But it is interesting to note that in 1913, we first saw Indian film in full form, feature film, Raja Harishchandra. And now in 2021, watching and rewatching films like Bajirao Mastani, full-grown Hollywood spectacle like Bonanza, where characterization, performances are less important. What you need is CGI, computer-generated effects. This is the kind of situation where an individual faces his most threatening challenge. You have to see whether the individual wins or the digital collectivity, whether we become synthetic, plastic objects of establishment, or we become independent, thinking beings.
You were quoting Tagore, that how he was saying that, well, a film could be a orchestra piece. So it could be a music, a piece of music, which is not only bound in the notes, it will give you something else, a tertiary meaning. So people were thinking like that. People were experimenting with films like that, the form. Are we?
In fact, Tagore himself, I tell you, Siloy, he was commissioned by the UFA studio, UFA, in Germany, to make a film. And he decided to confine himself within a room to write the script of a film called The Child. The fascists came to know of this film, and they naturally decided to arrange postponement of this, and UFA decided to postpone the film. Tagore came back. But if you look at the film, you will see that the scripting of lines and other things, it actually refers to a Christian journey. But with typical tale, which avoids the usual practice of narrative films as generated by Hollywood. If you look at the beginning of film, what do you see? In France, they were experimenting with the photogeny, the light possibilities of cinema. In Italy, they were using spectacles. In Germany, they were experimenting with expressionism, light and shadow things. But Hollywood ultimately won with their narrative, a good story with a good beginning, a middle, and an end. Why did they win? Because film began in the beginning of the 20th century. It could spread its wings till 1912 or 13. But in 1914, the First World War began. And naturally, capital and the artists had to fly. to the United States, which was a safer zone, at least not a war-driven zone. And in US too, the cinema-making zone was transformed from the western coast, Atlantic coast, to the Pacific, Hollywood area in California, because they are safe, more or less the same weather, cool. You have different kind of landscapes, mountain, desert, and other things. A small village ultimately became the global capital of cinema. But Hollywood also smelled of a danger. It believed in the possibility of telling a story, and it refused to enter a history. Say, let us go to Titanic. What did it promise? That it would describe you the affairs of a huge accident. And what did it tell you? Ultimately a love story. A collectivity entered into a story of the individual. And this is the trick of Hollywood, that it would always make you a Second World War story into a story of a few individuals. The Guns of Navarone, The Longest Day, The Finest Hour, and everything. It will ultimately depend on stardom. Marilyn Monroe, Elizabeth Taylor, or Marlon Brando, and something like that. But in Europe, you have a different notion. Say the musical. The Germans are very rich in musical. They will arrange their frames to suit a typical composition of Mozart. The way Satyajit Ray composed Charulata's images, he edited it in accordance with the provisions of a Mozart orchestra. Because you find so many characters, the masculine A characters clashing with the feminine B characters, giving you immense female and male characters. And that forms your performance in the cinema. You got a different, if you look at French cinema, since the French has a strong tradition of visualization, you can have so many images, very powerful images. But today we live in a society when we believe in stories, and when we also are very keen to posit history as stories. We are no longer within history. That is the whole danger. That is the crisis. We'll have to enter history again. We'll have to re-enter. That is my position.
So you were saying, Sanjoy, the huge success of Hollywood dictated the nature of the Indian movies, the way it was told and the way the experiments were done. It was all narrative based.
Ultimately, filmmaking is a kind of storytelling device using images.
Right, but so other kinds of experiments were not done because Hollywood kind of defined what movie is. And then we are like, nowadays there are a lot of filmmakers coming from all over the place, and then stories of all kinds of people and class are being told.
Particularly in Tamil film and in Hindi Bollywood cinema, you find the degeneration of storyline. You find so many spectacles happening in dance forms, in image formation, say Bajirao Mastani or Rajinikanth films in South. They are not that interested to get you a proper narrative story form. They present you with so many things
visuals,
which strike you, which amazes you, and other things. But on the other hand, you find a group of people, even in Bollywood, acting with low budget formula, very important performers, very sensible directors. Even in Shakespeare adaptation, you find people like Vishal Bharadwaj with his 3 films, which are quite interesting.
And also, we cannot leave this discussion without mentioning Gangs of Wasseypur.
Yes, Anurag Kashyap. The case of Anurag Kashyap. This is a position which makes us a bit optimistic that it's not a one-way traffic. The game is going on. It's just the half time. Now, let's see what happens in the second half.
Thank you, Sanjoy. I think this is a good stopping point, and I appreciate you for coming into this.
Thank you very much.
We are Chondimondop. All of our recorded sessions are interactive and of informal colloquial nature. At the same time, these verbal accounts are acknowledged as valued accounts of oral history. These works are being archived as audiovisual episodes for referral or research purpose. Such diverse volume of work would not have been possible unless our listeners came forth and collaborated with us. Our heartfelt thanks to all of you and request to all the listeners to subscribe to our YouTube channel. This will enable us in continuing this valued work in coming days. Please join hands and make the circle bigger.